Welcome back to Huffler Garage. So today is another video in our Huffler Marine series. So today we're working on our Yamaha 9.9. The model number on this motor is a FT 9.9 ELJ. We haven't used this motor much over the past couple of years, and so we are going to be changing out the fluids and the impeller because we don't know when the last time it was done, and we're going to show you how it's done. Alright, so we're going to start out with our oil change. We've got some Lucas outboard engine oil. It's a SAE 10W40, and we're going to remove our cover. The latch is down here. As we pull off the cover, we have our fill plug, we have our dipstick here, and we have our drain plug down there. So we're going to start by pumping our oil out of the dipstick hole, and once we pump that up, it's going to create a cleaner experience for when we pull that bottom plug. And here we go. We put this so deep it's kind of hard to get to. There we go. Pull our dipstick out, set it to the side, fish the hose down in there. Another hose goes into our jug. And turn it on. Alrighty. Believe. This is something I always like to check when you're pumping out. We pumped out right at a quart, and if that's what's required to go in it, then you know you pumped almost everything out. We're going to pull that plug just to get everything out of it, simply because this engine hasn't been, I guess, maintained over the past couple years. So to pull our drain plug, it is a 10 millimeter. Get my pan ready. Well, maybe the pen wasn't the best idea, but we were wondering also about a strainer, and most people said that, well, everything we could find, there wasn't a filter for this motor, but it looks like on this one there is a strainer in the plug, which typically, I believe, most other motors have a magnet on them. So that actually works out well, because we were wondering where the strainer was. And as you can tell, there wasn't much oil come out of it. Our pump worked amazingly well. So I'm going to clean this up and shove her back in. Alright, so we got our strainer cleaned out, which is our plug. I'm just going to wipe this up a little bit and get all the oil off of our motor. Make sure she's all clean. And we're just going to insert her back in there. And tighten her back up. These plugs don't require a lot of torque, so when you go to put them in, I recommend doing it by hand first, and then lightly with your ratchet. Just tighten her like that, because that is plastic and we do not want it to strip out. And we're going to fill her up with oil. Alright, we're going to put our dipstick back in. Once again, this dipstick is kind of underneath the carburetor, and it is not the easiest thing to grasp. I've got to do it with just 2 fingers. Maybe I just have too big of hands. I don't know. But once we get that in, pull this cap off, and this is where we're going to fill with oil. Pull that off, set it to the side. I'm going to use a funnel just because I don't trust myself not to spill oil absolutely everywhere. Been there, done that. All right. All right. Let that funnel drain for a second. And that should be exactly it. You dump the whole quart. A quart is 946 milliliters, so realistically it is 54 milliliters short of being a liter that goes into here. But that really shouldn't make a huge difference. After we let that drain, put your cap back on. And I typically like to run this and then check the oil. Obviously we know it has a liter in it, but we are going to go ahead and start on the foot, and then once we finish up the foot grease and the impeller, then we'll give her a start up. Alright, so now we're going to do the foot grease, and it's just a flat head to pull the drain plug. Oh, well, I was trying not to get grease on me, but apparently you passed me that rag. And that's why I wore gloves. But of course, clean that off, set it to the side, and that's our bottom plug. Now we pull the top one. And she's really draining there. Well, for one, our foot grease doesn't look milky, so that means the seals should be good, and it hasn't gotten moisture in it. But I will say that oil is very black, and it does still have viscosity, so I wouldn't say it was absolutely terrible, but it does kind of look like black tar, so good thing we're changing it out. Alright, so we're done draining our oil, or grease, I guess you may say. And we have our handy dandy pump. Get that wiped up. You screw that into the bottom. It's also at a weird angle, so I'm going to pull this adapter off and get the adapter started. And that might allow me, yeah. Simply because we're working so close to the ground. Put that in, and now I should be able to screw that in. Alright, so we are using an SAE 90 gear lube. It does say just about every model of engine that's out there: Yamaha, Evinrude, Mercury. Screws right down on there, and then we just pump. Oops. Might have been pumping a little too fast there, but once the oil starts coming out, we can put our top plug in. Quite surprising because it only took 400 milliliters. Well, yep, she's full. Now let's throw that plug in there. Alright, now for the fun part of pulling the bottom one out. Come on. This one you gotta be a little more speedy with. Sorry, I'm gonna have to change this up a wee bit. I don't know why that thing doesn't twist properly, but drain it like this, and then that way I can turn the whole pump. I don't know if I'm doing this right or not, but at least it's got oil in it. Alright. I am having issues. And we just get that hand tight, and that should be good. Now we just got to clean up all this oil and the mess that I made, and that's how you do the foot grease. Alright, we're going to start on our impeller. So we bought a genuine Yamaha impeller, and we bought the gaskets to go with it. As we laid this thing back and started looking at it, there's supposed to be 4 bolts, 2 on this side and 2 on this side, that holds this foot in there, and it is missing 2 bolts. So don't really know why that is, but I guess that's 2 less bolts to remove, and we're gonna see what happens, and hopefully it all goes back together and we'll eventually get some bolts to put back in it, but we're gonna go ahead and do the job. So we need our 12 millimeter socket. We have our ratchet. I'm gonna break these loose real quick. And I'm gonna have to pull the extension off. These bolts are kind of tight. Alright. I don't think they should be that tight coming all the way out, but I'm going to assume they're very corroded. Once I pull it out, we'll find out. Alright, and there's our first bolt. We'll set that to the side, not in the grass. Alright, so we got those 2 bolts out. And actually, we got to remove or unhook the shift linkage, which requires 2 10 millimeter wrenches, and for the engine to be shifted into the reverse position. You do have to have the motor in reverse, that way it pushes the nuts down far enough to put your 2 10 millimeter wrenches on it. Screw the lock nut back a little bit, and then we should just be able to Alright, now that we've got that loosened and detached, let's see if we can slide this foot out. Well, I'm going to pull this out like this, and then stand the motor back up. And that is how you remove the foot. Definitely quite black from all the exhaust. So, like I said, we have our impeller and we have our 2 gaskets. So we're going to remove these 4 bolts and we're going to show you what's in there. Alright, so we are going to remove our water pump cap. This requires a 10mm and it's just these 4 bolts on top. Alrighty, so now that we have our bolts out, start working. Voila, you're broke loose. Slide her up and off the shaft. And well, we'll pull all this apart and then show you everything that there is. Okay, so this thing, we need a screwdriver, and it should just pry, maybe. It's coming little by little. Switch to a bigger screwdriver. She was a bit tight on there. Get that pulled out. Want to make sure that keyway stays on there. And as you can tell,
hey, sorry, I just got that.
that is the difference between our new and our old impeller. So as you can see, this is our old impeller, and then this is our new one. And you can definitely tell that thing's been riding for a while. The fins are bent up. Whoops. And obviously this one's got a lot better play in it, or play structure. But yeah, so that's why you have to change out your impeller. Realistically, you should do it once a year or every 100 hours, I believe is what the manual says. So luckily we got in here and we've done this. So we're going to slide it all back together, get our gasket on there, and show you how to put it back together. We're going to clean this up just a little bit, just to make sure the gasket seals properly. Oops. Maybe. Voila. Little gasket there. Surprisingly, for how hard it was to get the bolts out and everything, the gasket was not an issue on the metal plate side. We still got to clean up our top cap. But we're going to go ahead and slide this impeller on. Make sure she lines up with the key and push her all the way down. So on our top cap, it's always best to inspect this as you clean it up. We just want to make sure it's not got any grooves in it, and it looks pretty shiny. It looks pretty good. Make sure there's no cracks in the cap as well. Let's see if we can pull this gasket off. Hopefully it comes off clean. I always love it when a gasket comes off clean. It makes it a lot easier. And that's our old gasket. I'm going to set that to the side. Just wipe her down. Alright, so we're going to slide our gasket on here. You do have to pinch these fins a little bit. Probably realistically should have put the gasket on it before I slid the impeller down on there, but you can do it this way as well. There's our gasket on there. Alright, and for our impellers, we put a little bit of dish detergent on them. You don't need much, just to wipe it down. That way it goes into that housing with a little more ease than just trying to shove it together. Alright. And of course that'll wash out once water runs through it. I'm just going to put a little bit of that residue on there. And now we just slide this back down on here. Actually, I believe the exhaust goes into the front side. That makes a little more sense. Turn the shaft. And I always like to start my bolts by hand. It's just something I do. Everyone's a little bit different. And I'm going to go for the powered option. Now you do not need to put much on here. I'm going to tighten that one down by hand. So, go back to our ratchet. Do not torque these with anything powered, simply because you can easily strip this stuff out. And you can tighten it down in a cross pattern. It's usually the way they say to do it. That way you're not pulling one side down and possibly end up cracking your housing. Alrighty. Now that you make sure all that is torqued down. Now that we have our top cap back on for the water pump, we typically like to rub this down with marine lubricant, but since we're not at the lake today, we have our WD-40 multi-use product. And this is just to make it waterproof and clean it off. So I'm just going to spray a little bit on here. We do have marine grease that we're going to put on the spline, and that way it's greased when it goes back in there. So I'm going to use a little bit of WD-40, and I'm going to wipe her down. Just to give it that water repellent kind of clean look, I guess you might say. And I wiped this down earlier with brake cleaner, but as you can tell, it's still quite dirty from all the exhaust. So the WD-40 absolutely does help do that cleaning. Alrighty. Do a little pump of Lucas. I think that's plenty enough. And just rub that into the splines. Nice shade of blue. It's like painting. Finger painting. Alright. So now that we have this all back together, we're going to slide her back up into the motor. Well, I didn't notice it when we were pulling it apart, but just figured out why there was only 2 bolts holding this foot on, and it is because 2 of them are broken off. So we're going to slap this back together with 2 bolts, and obviously later on we're going to be pulling the foot off again and trying to get them bolts out. But we just need to get it back together and make sure she runs. Alright, let's slide this thing back together. Come on. So we've got our foot slid back in here. Sorry we didn't film it. Obviously, with the camera, you can't always see what's going on. And I wasn't able to do it, but our cameraman that you rarely, almost never see, he was able to get it shoved back in there. So we're going to bolt it up. And we have our 2 bolts. It should be 4. Got that one started. All right. Now we need our ratchet again. And our 12mm socket. I want to pull this up evenly. Alright, now we got our 2 bolts torqued down. Now we can stand this motor up, throw the ears on it, and see if she runs and spits properly. Alright, well, in my haste to get this thing done, I almost forgot our shift linkage. So, once again, your 2 10mm wrenches. And pretty simple. And this is the part where you need 2 wrenches because there is a lock nut. And we just kind of lock that together. And voila! Now we can put the ears on it and get it running. Okay, as you can see, we have carburetor issues, we have a vacuum leak. That's actually going to be our next video. But we did our service for the engine oil, the foot grease, and the impeller. And she runs, and we got it adjusted for the shift linkage. That is something you may have to play with if you didn't really pay attention when you pulled it apart. Something I did. But Hey, like and subscribe and follow us for more. And if you're wanting to see us work on the carburetor, that'll be our next video. Thank you.